And in just a moment, live coverage of a discussion on cultural diversity on college campuses. You'll hear from two authors of books on the topic, Peter Thiel and John Wilson. The event is being hosted by the Heritage Foundation. Matthew Spalding, the organization's educational programs director, moderates.
Should I do anything with this mic? No. Just leave it here?
Yeah. Good evening. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and to the Third Generation. I'm Matthew Spalding, Director of Lectures and Educational Programs here. For those of you who are not familiar with our program, the Third Generation is a monthly series of panels, debates, and lectures especially arranged for young conservative activists around town. If you're not on our mailing list, please sign up on one outside. And I have one announcement, and that is a week from Saturday is our annual Third Generation Conference. There are nice flyers out in the lobby as well. I encourage you to pick one up. That's April 13th at the Crystal City Marriott in Arlington. Our topic is Issues 96, Implications for the Next Generation. As you'll see, we have a nice arrangement of speakers, and I encourage you to take a look at that. If you need any other information, you're always welcome to call the Heritage Foundation or look us up on our website on the internet, and I encourage you to do so. For some time now, the so-called multicultural debate has dominated the debate over the American Academy. Many professors and students have argued that identity or group politics have overtaken many prestigious universities at the cost of truth and Western civilization. Others, on the other hand, say political correctness is but a fictitious label applied by those who essentially are threatened by what is no more than a broadening curriculum. Peter Thiel is a product of Stanford's undergraduate and law schools and is now a research fellow at the Independent Institute in Oakland, California. He is the author of The Diversity Myth, Multiculturalism, and the Politics of Intolerance at Stanford. He argues in his book that political correctness at Stanford has been an expensive, catastrophic, and failing experiment, and that this multicultural program is but an example of the widespread problems that threaten our educational system today. John Wilson, on my left, is a graduate of the University of Illinois and is now a graduate student at the Committee on Social Thought at the University of Chicago. And he is the author of The Myth of Political Correctness, the conservative attack on higher education. Now, in his book, he argues that political correctness is not a real phenomenon at all, but merely a rhetorical argument used by conservatives to reframe academic debates and questions which they are essentially losing, and that the real threat comes not from the left, but indeed from the right. So, our question for this evening is, political correctness and multiculturalism on campus, does it exist? And most importantly, is it good for higher education? Now, our speakers will each make an opening statement of 5 minutes, followed by a rebuttal of 8 minutes, and a closing statement, succinct closing statement of 2 minutes. This format allows us the most time for questions and discussion afterwards from the audience. So, with that, we will begin with Mr. Wilson. It's all yours.
Thank you. Political correctness, I think, deserves some kind of award as the best soundbite of the 1990s. when you consider that in 1990, no one, practically no one, including me, had ever heard of it. But today, it now has a permanent place in our culture, in our dictionaries, and in our common discourse. And that came to me most powerfully earlier this year during an episode of The Simpsons. And the episode of The Simpsons told the story of the town's celebration of the bicentennial of its namesake and Revolutionary War hero, Jebediah Springfield. And Lisa Simpson's class is assigned to write a paper about Jebediah. And as usually happens, Lisa turns out to be too smart for her own good. She discovers that Jebediah Springfield was not really a hero, but was in fact an evil pirate who once tried to rob George Washington. So she turns in this paper to her class, revealing the truth. And when she gets it back, it has a big red F on it. And her teacher says, quote, "This is nothing more than dead white male bashing from a PC thug." And Lisa, distraught, goes home and tells her father, "She called me a PC thug." And Homer replies, "Well, I've been called a greasy thug too, and it never stops hurting." Now, Homer Simpson may be the only person in America, animated or otherwise, who hasn't heard about political correctness. But like the teacher who calls Lisa Simpson a PC thug for telling the truth, I think political correctness gets used to demonize opponents and to dismiss criticism of our traditions and of conservatives. So in that sense, I'm not here to deny or to defend political correctness. I'm here to deny the existence of it, in the sense that there is this accusation from conservatives that a leftist conspiracy has taken over college campuses, that it is imposing a totalitarian regime, that it is silencing conservative views, that it is discarding the classics in favor of left-wing multiculturalism, and it is ruining academic standards. Now, of course, there are cases where conservatives are censored. There are cases where leftists display intolerance of other views. And we need to oppose that kind of intolerance and censorship. But there's a curious inconsistency on the attacks on political correctness. The right-wing critics of PC, from Dinesh D'Souza to Lynn Cheney, will recount in endless detail all of the anecdotes about the left, from the silly to the inaccurate to the genuinely dangerous to academic freedom. But they won't say a word about what is called conservative correctness, the numerous cases where the right infringes upon the academic freedom of leftists, feminists, and gay and lesbian students and faculty, to name just a few. To give you just a few examples of what you won't hear about from Dinesh D'Souza or the people on the right, the case of an English professor at Nyack College who's fired for wearing a support gay rights button on her briefcase, and the president of the college who, when he defended her, was also dismissed. A woman at Brigham Young University, an English professor who was dismissed for making a pro-choice speech, and where now, earlier this year, the university decided that all professors must be approved by their local church leaders as good Mormons in order to remain employed. Another case, Lee Griffith at Elmira College, a campus minister who was fired for writing a letter about gay bashing on campus, and because he urged that non-discrimination policies based on sexual orientation be implemented. Kenneth Gowdy, a professor at Bethel College, who was fired for suggesting that homosexuality might be permissible in lifelong relationships. George Roach, the president of Hillsdale College, who, among his various activities, forced the editor of the student newspaper to resign and banned an alternative student newspaper from campus because it was critical of the administration, and then proceeded to expel the student who published that paper. And in addition, he was censured by the American Association of University Professors a few years ago for firing a professor who had dared to criticize the college. And John Silber, president of Boston University, who, among his other things, was found guilty of sex discrimination for denying tenure to a female professor who was unanimously approved by her department and a faculty committee. And Silber, in the proceedings, referred to the department as a damn matriarchy. He also, incidentally, has recently denied tenure to a sociologist who had near unanimous approval from his department because Silber did not approve of the sociologist's liberal views, even though the book that the sociologist had written recently won an award from the American Sociological Association. So those are just a few examples among many that I can cite of conservative correctness that you never hear about. As for multiculturalism, I think I have to say that reports of the death of Shakespeare have been greatly exaggerated. Let me give you just one anecdote here from Christopher Clausen of the Penn State English Department, who was the chair there. He once said, quote, "I would bet that the color purple is taught in more English courses today than all of Shakespeare's plays combined." Now, if this were true, it would be a sign of a great revolution in higher education, and one that frankly would disturb me, if it were true. However, I happened, when I was a student at the University of Illinois, to investigate this interesting little claim. I looked through the assignments for the English department at the University of Illinois, and I found no less than 5 introductory Shakespeare classes, 5 advanced Shakespeare classes, an honors seminar on Shakespeare, a graduate seminar on Shakespeare, and 8 non-Shakespeare classes that included Shakespeare as an author, far more than any other author. There was one class that was reading The Color Purple. And if you take the ratio of the number of students reading a Shakespearean play versus the number of students reading The Color Purple, it was 100 to 1. Yet, this statement by Clausen was repeatedly cited by William Bennett, by Dinesh D'Souza, as evidence of this grand revolution in higher education. What I think we have to do is realize that what's been said about political correctness, what's been said about multiculturalism, is often not the case, that the facts lie otherwise. There hasn't been a takeover by the left of higher education. There is instead, I think, a great danger in the right-wing attack on political correctness that is, in fact, an attack on academic freedom and on higher education. Thank you.
Thank you, John.